All right, well, let's kick off then. So firstly, thank you very much to everyone that's joined, and thank you to all of our panelists as well. So on the screen, we've got Mike, who's our Chief Technological Officer, Bertie, who's our Chief Executive Officer, Nicola, who is our Chief Marketing Officer, and Manisha, who is our Chief Financial Officer. So we'll get into what that actually means shortly. But Bertie, if we could start with you, if you could just give us a bit of context about how MyTutor came to be.
Yeah, of course. So I started my career in finance, which was a great place to learn, but the people 20 years senior to me were often still in the office sort of beyond 1 a.m. most evenings on weekends. It didn't really feel like the right place to stay. And I followed the education sector really closely. It seemed to be going at an incredible rate. There were lots of these new companies like Khan Academy coming, building up huge volumes. And I actually, the business I was really keen to run, a sort of a near-peer tutoring model, I found somebody called Robert, like mid-50s, with a very similar concept. So I cold called this man I'd never met before, got to know him over a couple of months, and like super eccentric character. And actually, rather than sort of going alone, we decided it'd be better to run a business together. So we moved in. His brother had a sort of office in central London, had a sort of spare room, his Pilates room that he wasn't really using, that we sort of set up shop in. And yeah, 7 years, that was 2 of us at the time. 7 years later, there are 100 of us. So it's been a quick change. Yeah, it was very, very much accidental, sort of fell into it.
Nice, thank you for that. And I guess an important thing to get out of the way now is what on earth all the acronyms mean that your job titles are. Certainly when I was at school and uni, I had no idea what CEO, CTO even were. Still kind of don't, so this will be useful for me. Manisha, can we start with you? What does your job entail?
Yeah, so I'm CFO, which stands for Chief Financial Officer. So basically, I own all things finance. So responsible for financial actions, but I also own people and legal, which is a little bit, it's wonderful for me, but very much different to the finance skill set. But basically it's anything like cash flow, financial planning and analysis, reviewing some commercial risks, but really helping to inform the business direction as well as managing those teams.
Nice, so a lot more than just finance. And what about you, Nicola?
Well, as you mentioned, I am the CMO at MyTutor, and that's Chief Marketing Officer rather than Chief Medical Officer, which I have apparently been mistaken for, and a role that I would be woefully underqualified for. In a nutshell, I'm responsible for all the marketing at MyTutor, so ensuring all our current and potential stakeholders, and that could be customers, partners, our employees, understand exactly what we do, why we do it, and who we do it for. So it's really telling our business story.
Nice, thank you. And Mike, over to you.
I was desperately trying to think of like something really funny to say that would be like, yeah, like clearly teetering on the edge or something like that. Chief Technology Officer. So I pretty much look after anything that entails passing data from one place to another, presenting a digital platform to our customers, and building on that through a software engineering team. Anything else in that area? And data is probably the, like, living in our data is probably the other part to that. So those are the kind of dimensions. So no, like in the background, no good joke occurred to me in that time, sorry.
And then Bertie, over to you, the most enigmatic of the acronyms. What does a CEO do?
So I guess there are sort of 4 key areas. One of them is around strategy, so understanding which direction we're pointing in, like what we're trying to build. The other really important one is the team, and building and making sure we have the right leadership for MyTutor. So basically everyone here is going to be more critical to the success of MyTutor than I am, and so the biggest part of my job is making sure we have the right people on the boat as well as it's pointing in the right direction. And then there's a bit about the sort of culture of the firm we're creating, like what is actually like and that goes to like how do we run as a company, what do we value, what are the sort of people we bring to the company. It's like the softer side of it, and again ultimately that's owned by everyone in the company, but when you're in early, when there are only 2 of you, it's a bit easier to start it from the beginning than coming to an organization that's already over 100 people and trying to change it then. And then I guess the last thing is just sort of helping make sure, and this is probably linked to strategy, that we stay true to our mission. Like MyTutor is trying to make life-changing tuition available to everyone, and holding us true to that mission is super important. It's why most people joined, and it's what everyone who joins the company cares about. So yeah, it's direction we're traveling in, which way the point's pointing, who's on the boat, how we behave when we're on it, and ultimately are we achieving our mission.
Nice. So lots of things.
And also, Emily, let's not forget that Bertie is our favourite radio spokesperson. So starring in many local radio stations as well. Hidden talent there.
The face of radio, exactly.
Great. So it would be good to know how you guys started out and ended up where you are. So Manisha, maybe we can start with you. What was your route here?
Yeah, so I actually did quite a non-specific degree. I really didn't know what I was supposed to do. I was quite academically bright, so I had a good foundation, but really didn't know what to do with it. So I went into politics, philosophy, and economics as a degree. I mean, I don't entirely know what you do with that afterwards, but then decided to keep my options open again and go for an accountancy qualification, because I kind of wanted to learn a little bit more and still wasn't really sure. I didn't really want to be an accountant, but I did want to be something in business. So that's where I started, but I spent lots of time in the corporate world. So I did my qualification with a Big Four, and then moved into another big corporate, and I found that world was a little bit, I don't know, maybe a bit boring for me. And Mike's grinning, because I know that maybe he feels the same. But I really wanted to kind of start helping businesses that really needed my help. So I started working for startups about 8 years ago.
Nice. And Mike, is that a similar experience for you, going from big companies to a small one?
Yeah, even going a step back, like had absolutely no clue where I was going. That's full disclosure, not the best thing. I thought I was going to be a fighter pilot, actually, somewhere back in the day, where memory still is addressable. I did my time served in a bunch of big corporates. So I worked for Disney, Visa, Ericsson, was part of the machinery. Felt I kind of earned my stripes a bit, but felt like I had a really low boredom threshold. And when you start getting antsy, you can kind of say, okay, time to settle down and earn the salary and kind of get into muscle memory, or you can go outside and challenge yourself a bit. And that gets quite scary along the way, and there'll definitely be bumps in the road, but it's really like a mindset thing around whether you think, I feel comfortable where I am and I can keep going with it, or I need more challenge. And just as an aside, I pre-prepared a bit of this answer. If anybody is a fan of podcasts, there's an amazing episode of the Infinite Monkey Cage. It's a Radio 4 program, very recently, about geology. Sounds really boring, but there's a brilliant segment around how one of the guys became a geologist, and just his rationale of how he ended up being one of the country's eminent geologists. Just the route from I got no idea what I'm going to do to I'm an absolute expert in this field is a brilliant thing to listen to. So I would really recommend that people find it. Nice.
Well, cheeky plug for tomorrow's careers webinar. We have a geologist, so.
I didn't even know that.
And Nicola, how about you? Was your trajectory a linear one or similar to Mike and Manisha?
Well, I had a really clear career plan from the age of 13, which was to be a vet. And everything went exactly to plan until I realized, just as I was about to go and study at university, that I didn't actually want to do it anymore. I just hadn't really reconsidered it. So all the work that went in, and suddenly, oh no, I don't want to do this anymore. So major panic, switched to study zoology, and no, I didn't want to work in a zoo either. I just thought, oh, that looks kind of interesting, I'll do that and worry about what happens afterwards later. As you can imagine, my parents were horrified. Anyway, finished my degree. My tutor offered me a PhD in tadpoles. That was enough to make me run away to London as fast as possible. The thought of studying tadpoles for 3 years filled me with fear, and having a university degree, I went to waitress for a while I worked out what on earth I was going to do. But this was a very long time ago. This was right at the start of the dot-com boom, like 20 years ago, before Google existed, and I just got swept up into that world, into that tech startup scale-up world, and I loved it so much that I never left. And since then, I've just worked in a whole heap of industries, from sports, beauty, printing, finance, and now obviously education. And I don't think since wanting to be a vet there's ever been a plan, but there are themes. And I think the two themes that have really come out when I look back on it are that one is making sure that I'm always working for a business that I really believe in. It's selling something, a product or a service that I really love. And the second one is I've only stayed for as long as I feel that I'm learning. And that could be a year, 3 years, 7 years, as long as I'm feeling that I'm still learning.
Nice, solid advice. And Bertie, I'll shoot this question over to you. So obviously, you know what it's like to be junior in a business. You've worked your way up the ranks. Which leadership skills do you find the most difficult to develop?
So I studied maths at university, and then I was an analyst in an investment bank. And so I spent most of my time in a spreadsheet. And that's very easy, right? You can move around, you've got full control over your environment. I then suddenly found myself trying to run a company with somebody 30 years older than me, completely different background, different personality type. And it was such a different shift in mindset to this sort of individual contribution, where I had full remit, to trying to collaborate, trying to work, to putting so much more time, I guess, into the relationship, really trying to understand from their perspective what they believed. And so I guess probably just like there's like a listening part to that, of like asking open-ended questions to really understand what the person's thinking, rather than just of constantly trying to validate things through my own frame of understanding, and just getting out of my head, having been in such an abstract world, took I'm still going. That was probably the thing that took me longest. Nice.
And what about you, Mike? What leadership skills were hard for you to develop?
I've thought a lot about this. I do internally think a lot about this as well. And I think it's like, for me, it's you start in a place where you really think you need to be the expert. You need to have all the answers, to kind of blending to a place where you realize you don't actually have to have all the answers. What you need to do is provide frameworks for your team around you to feel that they can come up with the answers, and they're not like answerable to you, and you're not like picking them up on their, did you score 100 on this test? It's like everybody can contribute. So how can you build frameworks? Like trivial example, I would not trust myself, and I would really hope my team wouldn't trust me to put like Java code onto our platform today, because I just don't do that on a day-to-day basis, and I'd probably do a terrible job. But I should be able to guide a team to have the right conversations, understand the problem they're trying to solve, and have the right kind of gateways for quality that allow them to deliver really good code into our platform. So yeah, it's kind of like blending yourself away from specialism, but maintaining that oversight and providing frameworks so people can deliver. And I was going to say one more thing about, it's kind of related, but I always had a sense that earlier in career, when I was like considered for my ability to contribute, like write some code or make a change, I always felt I was very much under scrutiny to like score 10 out of 10. And like moving from that, I'm always going to, in terms of my superiors, I'm going to present like a really positive case. Oh yeah, I'm going to score 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. So just like bear with me, to a position in leadership where you really have to kind of moderate and say, it's really important we present the proper picture, and if there are problems and faults, we need to be able to surface them. So it's like a honesty case. And I hope that made sense. It kind of felt kind of rambling to me, but it's definitely a mindset shift of feeling you need to be like delivering, and people are going to judge me on it, to it's okay, I'm in control of this, or I hope I'm in control of this. I'll try and moderate and present the right view so this company can make the right step forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how did you find that shift of going from being like very on the ground to actually in a more leadership position? Like, do you still get to get your hands dirty, or is it more just overseeing now?
I wouldn't be very good at consistently getting my hands dirty, because I just have to like switch across loads of stuff all the time, and I can't provide the right level of diligence and expertise. But I do think it's really important to keep a sense of where the challenges are at the operational and like delivery level. So not be totally detached from what the current like technology and frameworks look like and where the engineering challenges lie. You can't just become an orchestrator, like a kind of mover of chess pieces. You really need to understand like why it's going to be really difficult to do this next move. Yeah, I guess that would be like my kind of top level answer.
Yeah. And how about you, Nicola? How did you find that transition from being very on the ground to slightly more of an overseeing than a doing?
I think one of the wonderful things about working in a startup scale-up business is that you have to be flexible, and the business can be so agile. So there will always be times where you need to have all hands on deck. So for example, if we think back about lockdown last year, one of the things we really wanted to do as soon as they closed the schools was to be able to launch free online school large group tutorials, and that was all hands on deck. But generally what we're really there for is to enable our teams. They're the experts in those areas, and it's, as Mike said, creating those frameworks and that environment so that they can really deliver on the company's and the department's goals. So it's making sure that you're there to give them that support to do that. And I think what's really critical about that is knowing when there are gaps and you need to bring experts in. You can't possibly know everything. And I think one of the things that I struggled with initially was, but I'm expected to. And as you move up, you realize that actually nobody knows everything. And there will be situations where they're brand new for everyone and nobody knows. And we all put our brains together to work out what the best way forward is. And I found having a network, not just within the industry, but also within the function, has been so wonderfully supportive there, where if somebody in my team says, I'm not sure what I should do here, I can say, okay, I don't know that I can help here, but I do know somebody that can, and get that support for them.
That's awesome, yeah. Speaking of challenges, Manisha, can you tell us a bit about maybe the biggest challenge that you faced in your journey?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, it was a combination of like imposter syndrome and inexperienced managers. I think that when people see me, they see someone who's quite young looking, brown, she's female, and they don't really know which box to put me in. They're sort of like, they're still trying to work out, and it kind of means that I had to work extra hard to get people to take me seriously. And I kind of struggled with that a little bit, because it is hard, and some experienced managers maybe didn't also know what to do with me either. And it just meant that sometimes I felt that I wasn't doing a good enough job, or that I wasn't really supposed to be there, or I'd like somehow got my place in the accountancy firm by some sort of like diversity drive or something. I just didn't think that I was supposed to be there, and that I really, really struggled with that. And it took me a good like half a decade to really believe that actually I do have something to offer, and I can help people. And it was a conversation with one of my my university friends, where he is an entrepreneur, and his company was kind of going down the tubes, and he didn't really realize it. And it was only when he said, actually, could you take a look at this, these bits of financial information? And I was like, oh yeah, you've got like 2 months of cash left. You'd better do something really, really quickly. And it was at that point I was like, oh, I can help people. Like, my skill set and the way that I operate can be really valuable to people. And, you know, I still struggle with it sometimes, but it's getting less and less.
Nice. And Nicola, I know imposter syndrome is something we've spoken about before. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm another one with imposter syndrome. And just in case people don't know what it is, it's when you believe that you're not nearly as competent as others think you are. So you're pretty convinced you're going to get found out. And to give you an example, in my last job in the financial sector, I was absolutely convinced, similar to what Manisha said, that I'd been hired because they had a very, very male based senior leadership team, and I was the only woman on it. And for the first year, every time I had a one-to-one with my boss, I thought he was going to fire me. So I'd go into that meeting every time. And I remember after 3 months, when I was a little bit more confident, I said to him, I think you're going to fire me every time I come in. And he found this so hilarious that for every meeting after that, he would say, I'm not firing you, just to build up my confidence, because it was such a problem. But it's very nearly stopped me from taking some great opportunities where I've just thought, I can't do this and I'm going to fail. I worked for this wonderful company called Snapfish, which some of you may have used for photo printing, for 7 years. And I pulled out of the interview process of that one 3 times. I had a very, very tenacious boss there who just kept calling me saying, I want you to do this job. You're going to do this job. And I was like, no, I can't, coming up with every excuse under the sun. And it was probably 7 of the best years of my life. I got to travel the world, experience so much. I learned so much. I'm still in touch with the majority of the team, even though I left there probably 8 years ago now. And I so nearly missed out on it. So I have a little saying now with a couple of my friends, and it's feel the fear and do it anyway. And I've never read the book, but that headline, when I'm getting into that mode of like, I can't do this, it's get out of your comfort zone. Yes, you can. And there are plenty of people out there to support you as well.
Nice, thank you for sharing that, both of you. So when you guys are looking to hire someone to join your team, I'm keen to know what are the attributes you look for. So Bertie, what do you look for?
I said earlier around like one of the responsibilities is once we're on the boat, like how do we behave when we're there? Like what are the sort of and we've got 4 sort of key behaviors we look for on MyTutor. 2 of them I'll speak to around like acting like an owner and being an energy giver. The acting like an owner, Nicola spoke a bit about like how agile the environment is, how much things change. It's really hard to prescribe in a startup like this is exactly what it was going to be. And so someone who takes ownership at a much higher level, that if something changes, then they adapt and take ownership of that. So I think the for our stage of company, how quickly things change, how predictable it is, this sense of ownership where people are given more authority and can go off on their own is really important. And we look for that a lot at interview. The other one around energy giver, I think like bringing enthusiasm, like we're in it for the long run. Everyone here like cares a lot what the company's going to do. And people who bring enthusiasm, it doesn't have to be an extrovert, right? It can just be somebody who listens really carefully, who comes really prepared. But having people around you who give you energy makes the journey so much more exciting. You're excited to come into work. You're excited to continue running the thing from one year to the next. And so I think this, like of our 4 behaviors, acting like an owner and being an energy giver are 2 I really look for at interview stage.
Nice. And what about you, Mike? What do you look for when you're hiring someone for the tech team?
I'm such a soft skills person for such a hard skills kind of line of business. I'm really supposed to like look for people who can write amazing code. And what I really care about is potential mission alignment. I really care about EQ, IQ balance. So people who care about people, like just being a coder in a box who wants to put their headphones on and just code away all day. It doesn't work it possibly works better in like big scale businesses, but in a business that's growing like ours, and you need to like be aware of change, people who just want to understand their people they're working with. I'm a really big fan of people who self-invest, so a sense of a mission to self-learning and always wanting to kind of know the next thing or be challenged about the next thing. My my hiring, I wish I could like build my own framework for hiring. I'd probably be much better at it. People who can like articulate problems as opposed to necessarily just like solve the thing in the like the interview space. So like an intuition for the problem space they're involved in, which all kind of speaks back to like you don't have to be a maths graduate or a computer science graduate to do a tech job. You have to have a empathy for solving problems and understand that maybe technology is a good way of doing that. And that's kind of the very large box I try and put people within.
Yeah, that's probably quite reassuring for our uni students, because I feel like sometimes you pick a degree and then you think you're pigeonholed into that for the rest of your life. So that's
and it's so not the case. And even moving across functions, you know, in the past, I've hired people into marketing who've been in sales, who've been in HR, who've been office managers. And I think so much is about attitude and curiosity, and just coming back to what Mike said about self-investing. It's about people that really, they come to an interview and they're interested in what you do. They have great questions. They've done their research. That's the things that really matter. You can list off degrees left, right, and center, but if I don't feel you're interested, invested, and passionate about what we do, then you're not going to be the right fit.
Agreed. And there's so many routes to it, right? Even in finance, you don't have to have a degree. You can still get a qualification without having a degree. So, and it is totally about attitude and complementary skill sets. And you need different people to build a really robust team. So actually, I think it is about, it's about attitude. It's about research. It's about really just going for it and doing the best job that you can.
And on that note, Manisha, I was talking to my mum last night about careers and what she thought of me. And she said, I do still think you're going to be an accountant, Nicola. So
you've got it in you.
I might be joining your team soon.
You can do it.
Bertie, I don't think is convinced about my my number crunching there. So maybe not, but there may be an application coming in soon.
Nice.
And do you guys think it's fair to say that the luxury of being able to hire someone based more on sort of like personality, drive, and things like that is something that's afforded in startups more than, for example, a Big Four company? Manisha, I'm not sure, having worked for one.
Yeah, no, I think yeah, potentially. I mean, I left a Big Four company over a decade ago, so things might have changed dramatically, and they might be looking for like different types of people now. But when I was there, it was very much like you come from a certain university and you go into a Big Four company. Whereas I think now they are definitely looking at other places to find people, because there's so much talent. Not everybody goes to university. Not everyone finds their feet until, maybe they're 21 or 22 or, older. And to discount those people just because they haven't come through a certain route is, I think it means that companies aren't getting the best people all the time. So yeah, I think startups have got a little bit more of an open mind when it comes to that, and they're also not so much of a juggernaut, right? You don't have to really try to change the culture as much as a large corporate needs to. The culture starts from people being quite scrappy and entrepreneurial and trying to find people that they get on with regardless of their background.
Yeah, nice. Mike, I saw you on mute. Was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Mostly to support what Manisha was saying. I think I was going to say there's definitely been a realization amongst the more established kind of corporate or enterprise organizations that a scrappier, to kind of use a phrase, approach to how you might develop and explore new ideas would be a good thing, but I think they actually struggle from the culture fit. So we're kind of used to, in a startup world, just letting people develop or letting people find their potential, and then in a more enterprisey situation, it feels like they kind of create, a branch. Here's our experimentation branch, and come in here and join it, and you can behave more scrappily. But actually, reality is you butt up against the enterprise.
Yeah. So now let's shoot this question over to Manisha about if there's anything you might have done differently in your journey.
Yeah, I think it probably would have been be kinder to myself. So I think that Mike spoke a little bit about this, but that feeling that you need to be perfect all the time. And also it starts at school, right? It starts at school where you are tested on your ability through exams and, you know, individual contribution. And actually, you know, being successful is not just about your individual contribution. It's about like the relationships that you make. It's about your inquisitiveness. There's a lot more that goes on. And I think I was always trying to be perfect. I was always trying to get that 10 out of 10 and show that I was like, you know, amazing. And actually I should have been kinder to myself and sort of say, okay, everything's about learning opportunities. No one's going to get it right first time. So take those learning opportunities and ask the questions. I didn't ask enough questions when I was growing up or when I was in my first job, and asking questions is by far the best way to learn.
Mm. Nice. And what about you, Nicola? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it kind of relates back to Bertie's experience in the city. Had a better work-life balance. I think when I started out in the working world, there was a real cachet to working every hour of the day. And I've lost many an evening and a weekend and holidays to work. And there will always be certain situations, particularly in the startup space, where this may be required. But on the whole, working long hours is shown to have minimal benefit. You're just actually reducing the quality. So much research out there showing that. And I'm so pleased that businesses nowadays have a much more healthy attitude to it. I know that our people team, for example, really monitor this. And if they see people working a lot outside of those hours, they'll pick up on it and say, okay, let's have a conversation about your workload. But it's a habit, and it's quite ingrained that there's a part of me tied in with my imposter syndrome that believes that working longer means that I'm doing a better job, and there's guilt associated to it. So that's something that I would love to just remove from my brain, because it's absolutely not true. And I really want everyone that's listening to this to know that that's not how it should be. It's about quality of those working hours.
Mm. And so we've got around 5 minutes before we go to questions. So for all of our panelists, if you've got any questions, there's a little Q&A box at the bottom that you can drop them in. So before we do that, in the last 5 minutes, I would love to know from all of you the best piece of advice you were given, or the best piece of advice you can give the attendees. If you've got one for each, amazing. If not, just one is fine. Bertie, you're keen, you've unmuted. Go for it.
That was a signal, that was preparatory. I had one which was, I guess, from the investment world and finance, of casual decisions invite casual reversals. And again, I think like any experience I've had informs where I go next. So like ultimately, you can go any route and ultimately like find the right way. But I think by putting a lot of thought up front, like testing ideas where I want to go against friends, against family, again, like trying things out before I actually jumped into them, really helped me stick with where I ended up with my tutorings of 7 years on. So I definitely benefited from like really deliberating over it and knowing why I was going into it, not assuming it was right, but just being very clear on what the reasons were.
Nice. And how about you, Mike? A solid piece of advice to share?
It's kind of been touched on a few times here, and it's around the like, do you need a pathway? Do you need like a map to get to where you're intending to get to? One, probably impossible to know in an ever-changing and on a rapidly tighter cadence by the experience of the last 18 months or so world. We just don't know where the world's going. Yeah. My uncle gave me some advice, my only uncle, who I always consider like the wisest person in the world. And he told me, like, when I was about 16, he was actually advising me about my younger brother, who was a right retrograde. He was in a punk band. He'd run away from home at 14, never to be seen again. He was telling me, it's all right, Mike. You don't need to make one decision on your path to a future. You'll always get another chance. And I kind of looked at him and went, yeah, all right, good advice for my brother. We'll see how that turns out. Afterwards, I dropped out of my A-levels. I dropped out of my degree, rejoined both those things, and it all went kind of okay. You do get another chance. You are always on a path to reassessment. As long as you can, like, keep your values in the right place, I'm not going to say it's always going to be okay, but you get many chances to retrack your steps and pick up the breadcrumbs.
And did you drop out because you wanted to try something new, or?
Kind of, yeah, because I was lost and needed some time to reevaluate both times.
Hopefully reassuring for people who haven't picked the right thing first go. And Nicola, same for you with your vet zoology.
Exactly. And I've never regretted it, by the way. I've never once thought, God, why wasn't I a vet? Much as my mum has. Mike, I love that advice. I think holding your values true to yourself is so important, and making sure that you're always working in a space where you feel that is the case. I'll give one piece of advice that I was given and one that I would give. So one that I was given was, I was rabbiting away as usual, and my head of learning and development, who's also a fabulous coach, said to me, Nicola, why do you think you have 2 ears and 1 mouth? And I looked at him slightly astonished, and he's like, yes, you should listen twice as much as you talk, which is definitely not something I have done. And actually it spurred me on to go and get a diploma in coaching, because I realized that I really needed to spend more time listening and asking questions, going back to one of the great points that Manisha made, versus just talking. And advice I would give to people listening is, do try and find yourself a mentor. I have had multiple in my working life, depending on my role, my industry, and they have been so invaluable to me, really helping me keep growing and learning. And I'm still in touch with pretty much all of them now, and I don't know what I'd have done without them. And what I've always found amazing is there's been certain scenarios where I've said, would it be okay if I met you for a coffee in a couple of months with somebody that I'm totally in awe of? And they've said, absolutely. And people are so open to supporting, because they've always said to me, I had this in my career and I want to be able to give back. So don't be afraid to ask people that you think could really support you if they would have some time to spend with you, because most of the time they'll say yes.
That's nice. And Manisha, how about you?
Yeah, this is all great advice. I wish I'd had all this advice.
Down.
Yeah. I think my one piece of advice would be to surround yourself with people who challenge you, and don't give up. Just keep going. It doesn't really matter what happens, because every experience, whether it's positive or negative, is a learning experience, and it contributes to who you are. So surround yourself with people who will challenge you and will take you to the next level.
Amazing, thank you. And that brings us perfectly on to 20 to 6. So Mariota, if you would like to reveal yourself, I will pin you and you can run the Q&A.
Hi everyone, such great answers so far. So just to kick off, we had a couple of questions from, I think, sort of like GCSE and A-level students about what they can do now to set themselves up for the future. Like, what are some kind of transferable skills you can develop now that will, I feel like teens always, it's hard to, like, perhaps you don't need to practice being a CEO when you're a teen, but what kind of leadership skills could teens develop? Should we start with Bertie?
So what sort of leadership skills should teams develop?
Yeah, or like, what can you do as a team to develop your leadership skills?
I think coming back to Manisha's question, like having people around who challenge you, it's really hard to realize your own faults. And so if you have people around you who you trust to give you, you build up enough a trusting relationship that they feel comfortable giving you feedback on areas that you're potentially like really difficult or really awkward. I think that's one of the most powerful things. So I think, yeah, having people who give you candid feedback on what you're like to work with, feeling comfortable to give it back to the other person, and knowing that you have each other's best, like the sort of best in mind for each other, can be really powerful.
Right, and Manisha, would you have anything to add to that?
Is that as a teen, as in if you're 15 or 16?
Like, what can you do in school to practice to become CFO?
Yeah, I mean, not much, to be honest. Like, I think really, I think back on my experience, and I mean, I joined a few clubs. Like, I maybe did some drama, but I think working in a team was the one thing that I think I'd wish I'd done more of back when I was a teen, because I think basically being in the working world, you cannot do it by yourself. You have to be in a team, and you have to be comfortable with that. So I think if you're going to do things as a teenager, I would say it's team sports, it's team drama, it's team. Definitely try and do as much with others as you possibly can.
Right, and I'm assuming from what you've said that you're saying you don't actually have to be a leader the whole time, that just being in a team trains you for being a leader.
Absolutely. I don't think I set out to be a leader as such. I was just like, I don't know what I want to do. I'll just, do what the next step is. And the next step, as long as you keep going on that path, and you challenge yourself, you'll get there.
And I think there's a really important point there, Marita, that you're not always playing that leader role, and you need to be able to not be a leader sometimes. You need to be able to be a team player. And there are situations where Manisha might be leading, or Bertie might be leading, or someone else in the company, and it's about supporting them, enabling them, and providing what they need to make that team successful. And I think if you're always the leader, you always are getting what you want, going in the direction you want, and that may not always be the right skill set for a project you're working on. So I think there was some questions around, extracurricular stuff and all these things, even though they may not seem directly related to a career, being a part of a team is so valuable. I think one thing I'd add in as well is just stuff to help you with your confidence, and particularly with like communication and presentation skills. So drama, public speaking, even if it takes you right out of your comfort zone. And I can tell you that I get so scared every time I do a webinar, even though I've done hundreds. Every time I'm like, oh, I still get nervous now. And if I could look back when I was at secondary school, I wish I'd done more in that space to get confident in those skills.
I was just going to dive in with a kind of reinforcement on leading things is not necessarily about kind of standing at the top of the tier and making all the decisions. It's really about understanding where you can contribute and help a thing come out better. And there's like a trope, especially in like technology, we have a thing called servant masters, and to be the best leader, you're actually mostly a servant. And what you do is like remove barriers from everyone. And there are like loads of examples across life, and like the early examples for me were just getting involved in like club type activities where nobody else wants to paint the team sign that goes at the front of the playing field, but I'll do that, and that might get a couple of extra people into the crowd. And those are all contributory things. And you actually feel like you build your confidence by contributing, as opposed to like explicitly leading. It's definitely not the Apprentice model. Like what's his name? Alan Sugar is not going to say you're fired because you're a project manager, and you're contributing in a much more, in a way that just helps you build like your sense of where you can bring value.
Right. So you can really create opportunities for yourself. You don't have to be the captain of a team.
Explicitly like the boss with the hat, yeah.
Yeah, you can be the goalkeeper and still be a leader. I tell everyone. So we had a couple of questions on, I guess, because in the media, the kind of issue of cancel culture and sort of like online hate is quite is on kind of radio and podcasts a lot at the moment. I wonder, kind of with relevance to leadership, if you could give me examples of when you feel that you made a mistake as a leader and how you dealt with that. Bertie, do you want to start?
So, and that's a mistake. Do you mean specifically within like online media, in terms of like when you are like giving a message to the broader public, or just within MyTutor's walls?
I think just any time that you've been on a team or at MyTutor and you felt that you made a mistake, or perhaps you said something wrong, and then how you dealt with that as a leader.
I think there've been a lot. I think the sort of trial by fire for me was going from, as I said, sort of in spreadsheets to suddenly working with Robert, who was this person 30 years different, entirely different background, entirely different context. And I think I made just assumptions behind how they were approaching things, and I sort of based my entire assumptions on that, and almost was trying to be understood before I really understood. I was trying to like make myself understood before I'd really taken an understanding from that perspective, and it just ended up with the two of us talking to each other and no one really listening. So it sort of echoes some of Nicola's message as well. And I think from having a very sort of hostile situation to, I guess, changing my perspective to really like trying to understand where the other person's coming from, then it felt so much more collaborative. So I think, recognizing where I'm not listening the way I should be. It's probably the main thing.
How about Nicola? Like, how have you had experiences where you felt like that you just really said the wrong thing, or perhaps like you accidentally hurt someone? Or
Mariota, so many. And if anyone at our level says they haven't, then they're lying, because that's the whole point. You learn the most when you make mistakes. And I think Bertie absolutely nailed it. So much of it is down to communication, and we all have different ways of communicating, and we all interpret things differently. And I think one of the biggest things I learned over time, and particularly doing my coaching course, is that a lot of it's about the interpretation. And just because you don't think that's what you said doesn't mean that isn't what they heard. And, you know, I had a scenario at my last role where I worked in fintech, financial technology, where I was really clashing with my chief revenue officer. And I was just on my pedestal going, look, I know he's wrong. We're all fine in marketing. And it became a bit of a marketing versus sales thing. And it was only when someone said to me, God, it's like having divorced parents, that I thought, this is really bad. And we ended up going out for a walk. And I highly recommend, when you get to, like, if you're ever having conflict with someone, walking is brilliant for sorting it out. And when I took the time to listen to him and he took the time to listen to me, we realized it was all about, we'd had the wrong interpretation. And we came back, got all the team together, and then it's about being transparent, sharing what you've learned and what you're going to do about it, and learning about it. And so we just said, guys, we must have been a nightmare to work for, and this is why, and this is what we're going to do to change it. And he's a great friend of mine now, and it's so funny to look, we laugh sometimes, you're like, God, we were so awful, but we've both learned so much. And I was speaking to him just the other day, and he said, you know, it's so funny, I was reflecting back on our experience and how I work with my marketing team now, and it's so different off the back of that scenario. So yes, it was a huge mistake. Do I wish I hadn't done it? No, because I learned and took so much from it. So don't look at mistakes as being bad. They're the best opportunities to learn.
So I guess in response to the question about cancel culture, I guess it's to, in a company, not have a culture where people are cancelled, but rather where you really just have really open communication.
And particularly in our role, it's about ensuring that is the culture you have.
Yeah, and so kind of, would you say, like, as a leader, that you're, as Bertie was saying before, like, part of your role is creating the culture, and so if you create a culture where people can talk to each other, then you
absolutely. And I think one of the things that is so key to MyTutor is that we encourage feedback, we encourage learning, and there's no blame, there's no finger pointing. We're all in this together.
Yeah. On a similar question, someone said that they explicitly don't mean the MyTutor team, but how would you recommend managing a team where people aren't doing their work? Not MyTutor, obviously. As I guess that relates to, like, how do you give feedback? How do you give difficult feedback? Manisha, would you?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting one, because I had I've, especially across my career, I've had several times where I've managed people who haven't really been kind of pulling their weight, and the approach was always to understand what it was that why weren't they pulling their weight, and sort of surfacing my expectations of what they were supposed to do, getting them to sort of say, well, where are you on that where are you compared to my expectations, and having a more kind of open and honest conversation about why they maybe weren't there. So I think it's never a one size fits all policy, but like the others were saying, communication is just so important. Where you see it happen, those behaviors that you just think, I don't want that to blossom, you nip it in the bud and you talk about it straight off the bat. And I think that's the way that you deal with people who aren't meeting expectations.
Mike, have you had any kind of similar experience?
Well, way too many for the amount of time that's left. But it's super tough. Like, so the first thing is like understanding expectation against performance, and so having a framework. Like, we work in a like ever-changing, really tight cycle world that we have to react, because we're scaling to a market in a very strange world. And like, even thinking back 10 years ago, I probably would have said like nothing's that different. So, but you have to establish some framework around like what performance looks like. So what ownership looks like and what expectations are. I mean, at least you've got like a bar, and that needs to be shared both sides. It can't just like be imposed. It's like, right, I expect you to deliver this, 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 and this by these dates. That needs to be like mutually agreed. But actually, my more meaningful comment would be around as we scale, and as other companies I've been involved in scale, teams that have got the right mix of people who have shared objectives pretty much self-regulate for underperformance. They understand where they have their own challenges, and you like we've spoken a couple of times in this discussion about like creating a framework where people can thrive and reach their potential. And a really big part of that framework is letting the capsules of individuals who have got objectives together self-regulate themselves, and they can call out individuals who are not meeting expectations, and often that's a much more productive cycle, but it doesn't become a HR issue or a kind of disciplinary thing to manage. It's within the team, they're able to communicate and say, oh, we thought you were going to do this. Can you like lift your game, because it's really important to reach our next objective? And humans react much better at that kind of human level of interaction where they've got that shared objective.
Yeah, so I guess rather than a leader being this sort of kind of floaty, all-powerful figure at the top, it's like really the kind of continuous theme here seems to be someone who really, really communicates with everyone on the team all the time.
Yeah, and lets the team kind of own their own objectives under that, yeah.
If my internet is still working, is it still just about holding up? Yeah, well, let's just make it to the end. So we had a really good question here that's really relevant to the world now, from Ethan from the University of Birmingham's Investment Society. He's got a question on what's the best way to build a relationship with a remote team, as we're so familiar with at this point. How about Manisha, you kick us off? I'd love to hear from everyone.
Yeah, so we've obviously struggled with this. Well, not struggled, but we've had this challenge. Like we've really scaled quite quickly, and we're faced with like, how do you onboard people and build like a remote culture virtually? And the things that we've been doing are like really trying to create those moments, those water cooler moments that we call, sort of like those informal conversations that people would ordinarily have in the office, trying to create the environment where those happen. And you have to force it a little bit, but we hold like informal meetings where we pair people up and we say, you guys go off for 15-20 minutes and get to know each other. But we also over communicate quite a lot. So we communicate about what else is going on in the company. We have like a messaging service called Slack, which we use for things like team shout outs. So where you see somebody performing behaviors that are really relevant, we'll put those in the channel. But it's not any one thing, but it's kind of a combination of just being aware that you have to address it and you have to be active in your response to it, and getting people to talk as much as possible in whichever format that is, and trying to just communicate really effectively to everybody across the entire company in some way.
Yeah, and Bertie, as our CEO, would you have anything to add to that? I sort of clearly remember the last speech that you gave to us when we went away to work from home for 3 weeks.
Yeah. Back in a minute. It's been really hard to try and like recreate some of that serendipity, and I think just being really deliberate with the non-work conversations. It can be so easy just as you schedule a meeting for 30 minutes and that's your meeting time, to then not have the really important side conversations and check in. So I think really like being deliberate on, here's a time where like we're going to check in and connect on a more personal basis, rather than just leaving everything to be functional.
Yeah, and Nicola, you're a great example of someone who always makes time for people. Like, how would you, what sort of methods would you recommend for keeping up those kind of one-to-one relationships with people on your team?
I think really it's just, I think one of the things that you can do is just have a space in your diary where you've got like open house. So you block out a certain amount of time and people can just book in time there just for a one-to-one or for a catch-up. I make sure that I have regular one-to-ones with all of my team. But another thing that I think is really important, as Bertie was saying, is just to make sure that that's not just limited to your team and that's more spread across the business. So making sure that I'm catching up with everyone from operations to product to sales. And I find I always get way more out of them than I think the person I'm catching up with does, because hearing from people on the ground and insights and feedback from customers and their thoughts on the business and their challenges is so valuable. And it's often far more valuable than I expect it to be. So it's something I always make sure I can do. So I block out a certain amount of time each week to catch up with people outside of my direct team.
Yeah, and I guess I can add to that. And Nicola always asks first, like, how are you? Like, she always asks about the person before we get down to the business. So I would indirectly share that technique of Nicola's as well.
And mostly because I want to find out about Mariota's kittens.
Yeah, I guess you don't really care about me. It's more my
Both
cat.
of you, the holistic view.
Yeah, sure. And I guess just like very last question to kind of finish us off. When is an example for kind of each of you, if you give a kind of 10-second answer, when is an example of when you've experienced really great leadership in another person and what was the impact that it had on you in your career? Should we start with Mike?
I really wish you hadn't. So I was like really struggling. And it would be horrible to say Bertie, though obviously that is the case. Actually, not that long ago, if I'm super honest, back at the start of the pandemic, the world went very strange. I had just engaged with a business, a marketplace that was involved in providing nanny and school care to kids. And that world just broke overnight, pretty much, with the pandemic. What I saw there was leadership from the CEO and founder, who was very, very pragmatic, who really understood from day one, you can't pull the wool over people's eyes. This is like broken our business, and we need to be super open about it. And that just level of honesty was super refreshing across the board. It was horrible, by the way. It was super hard at like a individual job level, but not messing about and not prevaricating and kind of waiting if the world might change, but being decisive was really impressive, especially because I knew how much at a personal level it was really demanding on that CEO and founder to make that level of communication. So sorry, like a bit of a brutal one, sorry.
I guess that feeds back to the importance of just like being really honest and vulnerable and always communicating with your team.
Yeah, never, like when it matters, don't hide stuff.
Yeah.
Can I add into that? Because I think that's my great example as well, is that I was working as CMO in a business where it was finance and we got burgled. And some laptops were stolen, and the business could have chosen to do a number of different things depending on how much it chose to disclose. And our leader at the time said, these are our values, this is what we do. And we went out and were completely transparent about what happened, and it was a big hit for the business. And it was a really difficult dilemma because it took a lot of time and resource to do 100% the right thing, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. And it wasn't, he didn't waver for 1 second. It was, this is what we're doing. And I think that's what I really admired. It was, I'm holding true and I'm living the company values, even though it is absolutely the hardest path to take. And there are plenty of others we could have done.
For me, an example is actually smaller than that. So I think great leadership also comes from identifying things in your employees that they need and making sure that they have the tools to do that. Bertie did that very well with me. He said not very long ago, he was like, you need to work on these things and I'll give you the latitude to do it, and I'll get you a coach. And we did that, and it's like pretty much transformed my my working life. So that was good leadership from you, Bertie. Feedback.
Thanks, Manisha. Good feedback to see publicly. Mine, I think, so when I left my last role to set up MyTutor, I had two contrasting bets, one from the partner who hired me and one from the overall CEO of the company. The person who hired me clearly cared that he was losing headcount and he's had to hire someone again. And he asked me a lot about it, but each time it was like very clear he wasn't really listening. He was trying to convince me to stay. The CEO of the overall company sort of, again, asked all of these questions, asked challenging, but with an intent to really understand. And ultimately he was like, look, sounds like you've made a decision, you've made your mind up, like, how can I help? And I think it really ties in what we were saying before about how do you continue to build relationships. Like, clearly that CEO was somebody who valued the person more than like what I could do for them at the time. And that stuck with me. And I've kept in touch with that person, given updates every year on how things are going. Whereas a person who was just trying to convince me to do what was right for him, like, that relationship's passed. And then so I think, completing your earlier one, caring about the person rather than like holding your own personal objectives in mind makes such a big difference to your team.
Nice, thank you all for that. That brings us to 6 o'clock. Sadly, no more time for questions. But thank you all so much to all of our attendees and also our panelists. I hope it was insightful. I've learned a lot, so thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you very much, Emily and
Thank you.
Mariota.
Bye.
Thank you.